Before we begin, we want to let our listeners know that today's episode includes discussion of gun violence, death, and related topics. These conversations may be difficult or distressing for some listeners, so please take care of yourself as you listen and feel free to pause or step away if needed. Viewer discretion is advised.
All right. And with that, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Student Impact Report brought to you by the Student Basic Needs Coalition. I'm Taylor Allgood, joining you from Washington, D.C.
I'm Danae Taylor from Sacramento, California.
So, for our returning listeners, as always, welcome back and thanks for tuning in. And for our new listeners this week who may not know what the Student Impact Report is, this is a podcast where student leadership meets real world impact.
Each episode dives into the latest news affecting students and shares the stories of student leaders driving change on their campuses and beyond.
So, this is now our eighth episode of the series. So, if you haven't done so yet, be sure to check out our other episodes in the series. We've covered and followed a wide range of topics affecting higher ed today. And I know our last episode that we recently released. It included an exclusive interview with Colin Bannister, a student at Washington State University.
For more information and to listen on YouTube or Spotify, visit studentbasicneeds.com/podcast for links to our show.
And just one more reminder, like every week, we want to plug our engagement form. So if students are interested in engaging with our podcast, you can fill out the form on our website and you can choose from a few different options. You can submit a question, submit a shout out, or you can also apply to be interviewed right here on our show in one of our episodes. So be sure to check that out.
So, as always, we're going to offer up some higher ed news of our choice this week, and then later join us for an interview with Brady Roland, gun violence prevention advocate from Denver, Colorado, and student body president at Portland State University. So on April 23rd, 2025, reported by Associated Press, North Dakota Governor Kelly Armstrong, a Republican, vetoed two contentious bills. One aimed at expanding restrictions on sexual content in libraries, and the other proposing a private school voucher program. The proposed legislation sought to extend existing prohibitions on quote unquote explicit sexual material from public libraries to school libraries, mandating policies to restrict minors' access to certain materials, often those with LGBTQ themes. It also required libraries to implement technology preventing K through 12 students from accessing specific online content and involved local prosecutors in enforcement. While expressing support for expanding school choice, Governor Armstrong rejected the bill, citing its limited scope and flawed implementation plan. In his veto message, Armstrong said, "The bill represents a misguided attempt to legislate morality through overreach and censorship. The bill imposes vague and punitive burdens on professionals and opens the door to a host of unintended and damaging consequences for our communities." So this is fairly recent, but it's really encouraging to know that there's like still legislators, politicians out there who see these things happening and see the overreach and know that they have the power to change it and are taking that step to change it by doing stuff like vetoing bills like these. So it's really encouraging to hear, but unfortunately, not every state has the privilege of having a legislator who is as engaged in this way as Armstrong, especially a Republican legislator politician. But yeah,
Yeah, I was gonna say that like was actually positively surprising to hear that um this governor was, yeah, kind of able to, um, not just automatically side with, party lines and was able to kind of see the bigger picture of the implication of some of these um, aspects of the bill. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely overall not the best news that, these types of bills continue to be proposed and trying to be pushed through, but it's nice to know that there are still people who are really thoroughly examining what the impact of these could be and are doing their best to just vote for the interest of their people. So the first story that I want to cover today, as we mentioned in the beginning, this content may be heavy for some viewers, so viewer discretion is advised. I wanted to take a moment um, before we begin. This article covers a recent shooting on Florida State University's campus, as reported by the Tallahassee Democrat. On April 17th, a gunman on or at FSU's student union killed two people and injured six others. The victims were Robert Morales and Tiru Chaba, who were both beloved and valued campus staff members. Um, the identified shooter, 20-year-old Phoenix Eichner, was ultimately apprehended by police and I believe suffered a gunshot as well during that process. And according to the article I mentioned, published by the Tallahassee Democrat on April 24th, it stands that Eichner remains under armed guard in the hospital and will be formally charged upon his release. So you know, students and members of the community have responded to this tragedy in a few different ways. I know in the aftermath, um, some students on campus decided to, gather and, demand action against white supremacy in response, as that has been talked about as being, pretty linked to the suspect's views and, speculated that this could be part of like his overall motive. And in that, one student was actually arrested, furthering the concerns that we've been talking about regarding free speech on college campuses. And so that was kind of one piece that people have been talking about. And then, on another hand, the community has gathered in other ways. There was a campus vigil to honor the victims and survivors as well, who are still recovering and processing this. And that just shows the power of community, and the unfortunate tragedy that or the unfortunate reality that many times in this country, people have to you know, be resilient about this. And it's so common now in our society that, it's almost like numbing. Um, but I know later we will hear more about this in our interview with Brady Roland, a student at Portland State University who is a gun violence or anti-gun violence advocate. But we know that just, what happened at FSU just isn't an isolated tragedy, like I mentioned. It's part of a bigger pattern that we're beginning to see in the US. And so we really need some real common sense reform and stronger protections against extremist behavior on college campuses and, across the country.
Yeah, it's incredibly like unfortunate to hear, and I really hope that like students at FSU are rallying together and like not just in the advocacy way, but also just in the community way of like supporting each other, providing that comfort, that healing to each other. So I hope that's happening for them, or happening more. Yeah. So this next story. Many HBCUs rely on government funding, but what can they expect for the future? So about six colleges spoke to NBC News in an article that came out on April 16th. So 54% of Black colleges' total revenue depends on federal and state funds, compared with just one third for other colleges and universities, making them quote unquote susceptible to economic downturns, state divestments from higher education, or policy changes. This is from the authors of a 2019 report by the United Negro College Fund. Um, One of the colleges that spoke to NBC News was a assistant professor from Spelman College, Fatima Brunson. She said, students and others at these institutions are getting a steady and really unmistakable message that they are the enemies of the Trump administration at all levels. If there's a hiccup there, then we are going to get a stomach ulcer. Another person who spoke to NBC News was Hassim Temboy, an education professor at a public HBCU and an author. They said, this is an opportunity to look at ourselves as educators and evaluate how we are moving on education, focusing on change and lessons we can learn associated with how American students are served given those allocated funds. So in general, the six colleges all share this cultural concern about the future of HBCUs, not just funding, but also what they're allowed to just to teach in the classroom, also how they're going to be policed in that way. So while federal funding has provided crucial support, HBCUs continue to advocate for equitable investment to sustain and expand their contributions to higher education. Their ongoing efforts on securing consistent funding, enhancing academic offerings, and strengthening community engagement to ensure long-term success. I feel like a big part of HBCUs is not just the academic success, but also the community that's built there. And kind of like it feels like a safe space for a lot of students there because they feel accepted, they don't feel isolated in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's a concern that's on a lot of HBCUs' minds, students and faculty. But yeah, as we report on things like DEI rollbacks, of course, this would also come attached to that.
Yeah, it's interesting because don't quote me. I'll have to research for next time, next episode. But I was talking to my friend about this because yeah, like you were talking about, HBCUs, marginalized communities in colleges, like they have every right to be very concerned about, what's going on here, especially in regards to funding and how HBCUs do rely on a lot of government funding, and we've been seeing across the board departments and just a lot of things being slashed in colleges in an attempt to reconcile these budget cuts from the federal government. But strangely enough, I was talking to my friend about this, and she swears, and I think I did see it too, a bill that the Trump administration is drafting to invest in HBCUs, which I don't mean to say that so like confused because obviously that's good news, but like, coming from this administration who's also simultaneously, you know, banning DEI in education systems, like then the simultaneous move to invest in HBCUs is like a little like suspicious to me. Like I
Yeah.
just don't know what the ulterior motive is. And I think that's fair to say given everything that has happened so far. So, yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on this for sure. And I don't know how recent this was, and it might still be in the works, so maybe more developments will come. But yeah, so far what I've heard is that there's actually weirdly enough been a push to invest in HBCU, so we'll see how that plays out. Another article that I want to cover, published by the Syracuse.com on April 23rd, is some pretty good news, actually. It talks about how some international students who were stripped of U.S. legal status so abruptly are actually piling up wins in a court now. Um, but just to provide some context, and this is just one example of many, the article discusses how a student recently, his name is Anjan Roy, and he's a graduate student at Missouri State University. For studying from Bangladesh, found his legal status was terminated without warning. Um, and as you can imagine, this, caused a whirlwind of emotion, of stress. He isolated himself, avoided going out, it talked about, even kept his phone off out of like fear of being picked up and detained by ICE agents. And we know that this is not an isolated case. Many international students are feeling similar sentiments across the US, and more than 1,100 international students across 174 colleges so far have faced the same situation since late March. And those numbers now, with it, being into May, are likely much higher. And so some judges across the country have temporarily restored student status, which is, great news, as, For many colleges, graduation is approaching. This is putting like, a wrench in everyone's like plans and expectations of, how they plan to live and have a career here. And so it is good news, but it's also essentially a patchwork solution because a lot of students are still in this limbo of, is this just temporary? Will my status be revoked again? Um, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the crackdowns about revoking visas of visitors who um, acted, quote, counter to national interests. But what we do know is that students have had their visas revoked for a number of random issues that don't seem to correlate. And this includes protesters who have advocated for justice in Gaza and Palestine, to students who had minor traffic infractions, such as running a stop sign or stoplight, and honestly, to students who had no clear wrongdoing at all. They just woke up one day and the SEVIS system just had told them that they were no longer allowed to study in the US and had their visas revoked. And because of this, many international students are living in, this staggering fear, wondering when or if they may be next to have their visas revoked. But this article does offer a bit of good news because it shows that students and the justice system are fighting back, and many are even winning. And federal judges have started to restore the legal status for students like Anjan, at least temporarily. Um, and it's not a full fix, but at least it's showing that, the government's crackdown isn't going fully unchallenged. And we know that this is only a little past 100 days into the presidency. There's still a long way to go. But these legal wins are important because it's giving students a chance to stay, finish their degrees, keep building. And it's also building some momentum for universities and, the justice system and students alike to really push back against some of these harmful policies.
It's really like encouraging to hear that like these students are winning their cases or like maybe temporarily getting like winning their cases because there's so many different like issues that aren't really getting to that level. Like I know a few weeks ago I reported about like drag shows getting banned in certain states like Texas, which they're not really winning a lot of those court cases, but it's good to know that like there's judges who are seeing these students who are being unjustly treated. Um, and really ruining not just their academic career, but like just their livelihood and things they want to do every day. That they're unable to do while they're being detained for this stuff like this. So it's really encouraging to hear that there's more progress, but there's definitely a long way to go. So this next story is an update, it's a year in review of a program that was at Santa Monica College. It started just last May. So Cal Matters reported an article on April 2022. The Homeless Service Work Certificate Program, funded by Los Angeles Service Authority, was introduced in May 2024 for the first cohort of 25 students. The curriculum includes courses on the history of homelessness, effective client support practices, and strategies to prevent burnout. The program looks to train college students for jobs helping homeless Californians. But since then, it's been a year in reflection for this program. Since then, the program has faced towering challenges such as unreliable funding, high attrition rates with only about half of its initial students left, and overall political uncertainty. So in regards to their budget, they originally started with a $750,000 budget, but the future of that money is kind of up in the air. In a budget released by Gavin Newsom, there was no renewal for those funds that they initially received, so they're not sure how they will move forward. Um, Also, the LAHSA, which supports the program, is experiencing some internal turmoil. Following a critical audit, the LA County Board of Supervisors voted to withdraw funding from LAHSA, and the agency's executive director announced her resignation. There's a lot of things changing, a lot of uncertainty, especially with funds, which is a big part for providing for courses and programs like these. Um, but Tamara Simpson, who's a part of this program at Santa Monica College, spoke to Cal Matters. She said, as an inaugural cohort, there are going to be missteps. We're essentially the guinea pigs. She continues, at its core, it's an incredible opportunity. So yeah, this isn't the only program in the nation that's like struggling to find funding for stuff like this. And we're unsure to know if this funding would have happened with or without the Trump administration. But I hope that there's still some progress that can be made and the program can continue because programs like these can definitely show up at different schools. So it's really nice to hear that Santa Monica College is fighting for this program, despite the tribulations they had to go through while facilitating it.
Yeah, I mean, when you started, it was like great news. I'm like, yeah, this is a great program. It's like sad to hear as you're going along that they're like, you know, considering slashing the funding for this. And w the quote that you offered at the end was kind of along my lines of thinking too. I'm like, a lot of these programs are going to take a few years to like really get off the ground and like establish their roots. And so it's really just like unfortunate that, in a society where like people just expect results so quick, they can just after 1 year decide that something is not worthy of investment because they're not seeing those like immediate results. And it's like, I wonder if they would have taken the time to just like really assess like program capacity and like other components of it to like really try to figure out like where some of these shortfalls may be stemming from. Like if that could have like improved the program before just deciding that like it wasn't worthy of funding altogether. But I know it's also indicative of like a larger series and set of funding cuts that like agencies are experiencing across the board. So I know that it is hard. You do have to like essentially with a smaller budget pick and choose. And a lot of people will choose like what I guess is already working or has been working well. It doesn't really give a lot of opportunity for like new projects and like, new things to kind of branch off at this point. But yeah, I really hope they like reconsider this in the future or at least like take the time to like reassess maybe what were some ways that they could have like you know, develop this program before just like kind of just tossing it.
Yeah.
But stay tuned, everyone, because next up, as we mentioned, we'll be featuring an interview with Brady Roland, a gun violence prevention advocate from Denver, Colorado, and student body president at Portland State University.
So that wraps up this week's episode of the Student Impact Report. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at SBNC_USA for updates. You can also catch our episodes on Spotify and YouTube, so be sure to visit studentbasicneeds.com/podcast and tune in next week. Again, my name is Maya.
And I'm Taylor.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Student Impact Report. Okay.
Brady Roland is in the second year of her studies to achieve a BA in Public Health Studies at Portland State University. She has been a longtime advocate for gun violence prevention, especially among youth. Since she was 13, she has been lobbying, organizing, and advocating in her community for safer measures against guns, community violence intervention program funding, and gun violence survivors and victims' rights. She aims to amplify the stories of survivors to encourage real change on this issue. Brady wants to research the characteristics of survivorship and the economics of gun violence. This summer, she will be participating in an injury research program with the University of Washington, where she hopes to analyze data about gun violence in the U.S. After she graduates from Portland State, she hopes to become a Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health Master's Fellow studying violence prevention. Welcome, Brady.
Thank you so much, Taylor.
So let's dive on into some questions. I know you've been advocating for gun violence since you were 13 years old. Can you take us back to what first sparked your interest in this issue and how that early experience shaped your voice as an advocate?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, 13 is like when I really started like seriously advocating for gun violence prevention, but I was 7 or 8. when Sandy Hook happened in 2012, our teacher had like explained, my second grade teacher had like explained what went down and the new security precautions that we would be taking at my elementary school that I went to. I mean, it was just all so shocking back then, and so I feel like I stayed in that like state of utter shock until Parkland happened in 2018, and I was 13 when Parkland happened. And wow, it was being a 13-year-old on Twitter was probably not the best call, but being a 13-year-old Twitter on February 14th, 2018 is a really bad call. Um, it was brutal to watch and to see, and it kept it kept me from school. Like I would have nightmares and I would just be in the counselor's office every day just thinking about the poor families and people who experience that in the whole community. And so when Parkland happened, my motivation to create like a Safer America struck, so to say. And I think like to answer the second part of your question, like being so young in comparison to everybody else I was working with, like everybody else I was working with was in high school or college, and I was like still in seventh grade or eighth grade. And so, um, I just like, I remember just being like, I felt a little bit like imposter syndrome, but because I knew that I cared so much, and like as I met more and more people in the field, more and more survivors and advocates, they really made me feel more comfortable with like being so young and being in advocacy. They encouraged it. And now that I'm an adult, like I just look back and think like I wouldn't have traded that for anything because I grew up like being so much younger than everyone alongside hearing all these stories from survivors at such a young age. I mean, it shaped me and it really made me a more mature, like little kid. So by the time I was in high school, like I feel like I was, and not to brag, but like I went to a high school in an area where most people were not excited about getting educated or excited about politics. And I just felt like I was worlds ahead than everybody else in high school in that sense. And I think that was because of starting so young. Yeah.
Yeah, I resonate a lot with when you were speaking about the young ages that honestly we were both young ages when those two events happened, especially the Parkland school shooting. I was in high school at that time, and I just remember the ripple that it sent through my high school as well. And there was a previous school shooting near my high school as well at another high school nearby. And so having, I think, those like accumulated experiences and then seeing it in the news, yeah, it leaves an impression on a young mind. And I know that, our generation is increasingly, rising up and pushing for this advocacy, but it hasn't always been seen as an issue. For some
Mm-mm.
reason, no matter how often it happens, it's still not being given the adequate attention that it needs. And I know you mentioned now you're an adult, you're in college, and I don't know if I mentioned this when I introduced you, but I know you're also student body president at Portland State. So my next question is kind of switching gears a little bit, but more generally, how have you brought your passion for advocacy and your experiences into your new leadership on campus? Do you have like any specific initiatives or conversations that you've led in this role related to gun violence prevention, or any other topic?
Yeah. So the reason I came to Portland State was because it has this deep tie to advocacy and especially um, gun violence prevention advocacy because uh, after Parkland happened, a little bit after, a man was watching basketball game on at a bar in my town, and um, the campus police, the Portland State campus police, murdered him with a gun, and they shot him, I think, like 11 times. He was breaking up a fight, and so when I learned about that, and I learned about what the students, staff, and faculty did afterwards to remember and honor Jason Washington's legacy in life, with the calling of Disarm PSU and getting guns off of our campus, I just felt like that would be the perfect place for me. So I've worked with a lot of those original advocates who were here when Jason was, you know, murdered. And I've worked with them to bring Disarm PSU kind of like back into the light. And also, um, I've been doing individual things as well, where like my freshman year last year, we did a town hall with campus public safety officers and UPSOC, which is the University Public Safety Oversight Committee, which is what I also sit on that committee. And so we did like a town hall with them to answer as many questions to students, staff, and faculty as we could about like campus safety and security. And then, like for Jason Washington, tapping back into that, I led a letter writing campaign to his family because we did a symposium for him and his family last year on campus, and we unveiled this beautiful mural of Jason and his family. And it's in our student union, just a couple floors up from where I am now. And yeah, I did a letter writing campaign where I got students to write letters to the family and basically express our support and admiration for their strength and whatnot. And so I did that. And then I also like to, Salem is like an hour and a half away, the capital of Oregon. So I'll like, chat up random students who hit me up for one reason or another. And I'll be like, oh, yeah, by the way, like, I'm going to Salem on Thursday to advocate for bills that are preventing violence and especially gun violence. And so many students they just get so interested. So I've been bringing students with me down to the Capitol to lobby for gun violence prevention bills. Because being anti-violence is such a big proponent of Portland State's community. So I feel like just pushing that out because like there was a protest here in the 70s about Vietnam War and Kent State. So like together. And knowing that people were protesting the National Guard deployment on Kent State, killed students, I just felt like, oh, like PSU has this great history. And so I've just been trying to amplify the voices of people who I know are survivors on campus and bring them to Salem to share their stories and, have them write testimony to lawmakers in Oregon and in the uh, in Congress. And so, yeah, I feel like mainly just trying to get students to care about it is what my big initiative has been. And that takes a while because this campus is so, I mean, everybody has their like number one issue. Mine just happens to be gun violence, but for so many people here, it could be, the ongoing governmental destruction of the Philippines or, the genocide in Gaza. And, there's so many things that people could care about right now, especially with Trump in office. But I'm trying to make sure that students recognize the dangers of having a country with more guns than people, especially for young people, as guns are the number one killer of kids, teens, and young adults in America. And so, yeah, honestly, just trying to get students to care is my biggest thing that I've been doing. But my freshman year, I definitely did a lot of GVP focused stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of advocacy I'm doing recently, but safety and security of students is always my top priority.
Thanks for sharing that. I think like my main thought through all of this is on one hand, it's unfortunate that, you even have to work so hard to advocate for this issue. Um, when there are lawmakers and other people who should be prioritizing this, it often does fall on, into the hands of students and youth and leaders who have to speak out against this. But as you were speaking, it just really like pulled the connectedness of this issue in for me and like showing how widespread this is across the country because you even mentioned Kent State. My sister went to Kent State, and although she didn't, attend the university at the time when that tragedy had happened, I remember learning about that as we were touring the campus with her. And so just to see that like that has, lived on and that people are still advocating and remembering about it. It is touching, but like you said, students focus on so many different topic areas. So many students have different passions. And so it is commendable, unfortunate, but commendable at the same time that you are able to like, keep this issue like present in people's minds and say, this is going on and it is a very like pressing issue that is, like you said, affecting youth, especially at very high rates.
Yeah.
I know that, your advocacy not only focuses on policy change, but it also focuses on uplifting the voices of gun violence survivors and people who have either fallen victim or been witnesses to gun violence. And so, why do you think centering survivor stories are so important for your approach? And, what work do you do to make sure that these stories are being uplifted and that these survivor voices are being heard?
Yeah, survivors are the reason I continue this work day after day because I mean, I just don't know how anyone could really fall asleep at night knowing the people that I know and knowing their stories. It's really difficult. Like, ever since I started advocating and listening to survivors, meeting survivors, hearing their stories, I've been I got like diagnosed with like too bad of nightmares and insomnia. And I've ever since then had to take like meds to help me go to sleep because I just don't understand how anyone could hear this story and not want to fight for what's right. Um, so I guess like I try to ensure that survivors are like when they're sharing their story, they're in a comfortable place. It's not going to, trigger their PTSD, which so many gun violence survivors suffer from on a daily basis. Um, I I just try to make sure they're in a safe space mentally, physically, before they share anything. And then, after they have spoken, if I feel like it didn't get through enough, I'll push them. I'll push them to say, to tell these people, you need to listen to me because you have failed me. And so really just making sure survivors know that this country has failed them and that they have a voice and they can stand up right back up for themselves, but they don't need to. It's just an option. Like I'm not one of those people that expects everybody to be an advocate for something. Like if you just want to roll through life, respect. But like if you unwillingly have encountered a experience of gun violence, it is absolutely your choice what to do with that. Whether you want to keep it in, keep it for you and your therapist, or whether you want to shout it from the rooftops and demand change, I respect that. And so I just try to make sure that every survivor I meet knows that there's a platform to share, but they don't have to 24/7 because that can be really uncomfortable. Um, but like on this question, I just want to highlight some people who have like really changed my life who are gun violence survivors. I come from Colorado. I was born in the mountains and then raised in Denver. And in Denver and surrounding Denver, there is wild amounts of mass gun violence, community gun violence, domestic gun violence. And I've met survivors of, any type of gun violence you could come up with. And so the Aurora shooting in 2012 for the Batman screening, Jessie was a girl who was there, and her parents, Sandy and Lonnie Phillips, they taught me what it means to be an advocate for survivors. They have an organization called Survivors Empowered, and if you're a gun violence survivor, this is the best organization you can go to because Sandy and Lonnie like take survivors on retreats to their home to Mexico, and then they help survivors um, like tell their story in a effective and meaningful way. And so most of the credit to making sure survivors are heard, I would give to Sandy and Lonnie and like what they've taught me about it. Um, but yeah, Sandy and Lonnie are just the most upstanding people I've ever met. And then there's Tom Mauser, whose son Daniel Mauser died in Columbine. Tom Sullivan, whose son died in Aurora. Allison Olson, Amanda Wilcox. I mean, there's just so many survivors I can name and come up with that have impacted me and made me want to be a better advocate. And because it's one thing to care about policy, but the heart of this issue is the people who have been affected. And to be blind to that, or to be, less inclined to touch in with that side of gun violence prevention is just disrespectful to the entire community of survivors and victims out there. So I try to make sure that if I want to speak, but a survivor is also there, that I let the survivor speak way before I ever would. Um, Stuff like that. I mean, I just am always trying to uplift survivors any way I can.
Yeah, that that comment you made about, staying up at night and having trouble like sleeping at the thought that these are real human lives that are being impacted. And I think that if I could just weigh in, is I think that's what gets so lost in translation. I don't know if it's, it has to be an American cultural thing that
Hmm.
we've just become, well, not we, but people have become so desensitized in a way to violence, trauma, tragedy, that when you hear about these things, you almost feel so removed from it because, oh, it happened in Colorado and I'm in X state, or it happened
Yeah.
here, but I'm there. People don't always understand the gravity of these things until it impacts, someone or something closer to them. And
Yeah.
I just often wonder if like part of the solution is like empathy building or like community building, right? Like how do we get people to feel, not just see, but feel the gravity of, you know, gun violence and
Yeah.
all the ways that it manifests in our country.
Hmm.
Um, To switch gears a little bit again, I know that you are set to participate in an injury research program at the University of Washington this summer, so congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, I guess I'm just curious, like, what questions are you most excited to explore through that research, or what are you hoping to get out of that experience as it relates to health strategies around gun violence?
For sure. Harborview Medical Center Injury Prevention Office, I'm not sure, is housed at UW, and they have like an undergraduate research like experience program where you get partnered up with a mentor, and then you use their primary data collection to analyze that and come up with, X, and so it's not all about gun violence. And so I'm really happy that I got in because I literally said in the interview, I was like, if I get in and my project doesn't have to do with gun violence, like there's a 50-50 chance I'm gonna drop the program. Like I don't care about the stipend because what I care about is making sure this experience will benefit survivors of gun violence, and I don't want to ever like spend time on anything else but uplifting my community. And so, like, analyzing fall data, like 60 to 80-year-old fall data sets, like, that just, that's a accident and it deserves to be studied and so that we can figure out how to better support that community. But we support that community of older folks so much. What's at risk here is young people who have to grow up in a country where there's more guns than people, and like you said, gun culture is real. You know, there's this really great line from this movie, um, or this TV show where this guy, he accidentally shoots his granddaughter in the chest and then says to the police afterwards, like, giving up that gun, my daughter wanted me to give up that gun and she would buy me a new security system. But it almost felt like if I gave up that gun, I was giving up my manhood. So to have so many men and women who have grown up in this culture of um, shooting guns, almost like are connected to it like it's a part of them. And so I don't know exactly what I'll be researching yet. I'm hopeful it will be gun violence related. So I don't know like specific questions what I want to answer, but what I hope to get out of this experience is I really I really want to just like impress all of the people who got me to this point. Like all the survivors and advocates in the gun violence prevention space. Um, and I just majority of my friends I've met because of gun violence prevention. And so I just want to honor them and impress them because they've known me since I was like 4, 5. Like I was 4 feet 5 when these people met me. And to like grow up and show them like I want to be serious about this for the rest of my life, I think is what I'm hoping to get out of it is just like the confidence to know that if I can do this, I can do it for a career, you know? Um, so yeah, that's mainly what I'm trying to get out of it. I'm also a public health major, so I'm trying really hard to like do more public health research because I do a lot of public health studying, but doing research and studying research is completely separate. And so I don't know. I'm just excited to like gain more confidence in doing like Sandy Lonnie, the Toms, Penny, all the kids that I've met from Parkland and all the kids I've met from STEM and all these school shootings, Boulder, Colorado Springs Pulse nightclub or Colorado Springs nightclub, Pulse nightclub. Like I've met so many survivors and they have all led me to where I am. And so what I'm hoping to get out of this is a more confidence in my research skills, but B, more understanding of gun violence as an issue so that I can be a better advocate for the people that inspire me to be an advocate. Yeah.
Well, I know we only met a few minutes ago, but I am proud of you. Like just hearing
Thank
you
you.
speak so far, I just keep getting chills up and down my arms because I can just really see like the passion and then like, oh, it makes me just emotional to just, you know, see that, your heart is in this. And I really do know that you can take this all the way and you can really and you have been making a change, not only by uplifting survivor voices, but uh, just being a youth voice or an adult voice now, but just being a voice in the community to, yeah, like I mentioned before, keeping this issue prevalent in the minds of people, especially, with all of these administrative,
Yeah.
chaotic things that are happening right now, it can get very like easy to get caught up in like the frustration and like the feeling of like hopelessness in a way of just like,
Yeah.
wow, is this where we're really at? But
Yeah.
I don't know, just seeing you speak and just you mentioning all these other advocates and these leaders in the community who have been like taking a stand against this, like it does give me hope and it gives me faith that one day no one will even, really need to push so hard for this because it'll be a consensus.
Yeah. That's my hope. That's like end goal before I die. What I want to accomplish is just like making sure gun owners are responsible, making sure Americans are safe from guns, and also just like generally, like you said earlier, making sure people have empathy for anyone who's experienced gun culture and violence and whatnot. And so, yeah, yeah, I appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Well, I want to leave us, kind of on a more positive note. I always like to end our interviews with kind of like more pieces of advice because, our podcast is tailored towards students like
Mhm.
yourself, who want to get involved, who want to tap into their power and their advocacy, but might not know where to start. So, particularly as it relates to this issue, I guess I'm curious to know, like, what would you tell someone or like what advice would you give to somebody who may want to take action or have an involvement in complex issues like gun violence, but may not know where to start or may feel like their voice is too small to matter?
Yeah, I sympathize with those people because for, at least 5 years until I organized like my first rally in Denver. Up until that rally and like everything leading up to that essentially made me feel like my voice is too small. I'm not affecting change. Like I'm in this and nothing's changing. Like what's the point? But Uvalde happened and so many people were angry and so many people were looking for a place to advocate against what happened and advocate for gun safety. And so, my advice to someone who wants to get like involved with a complex issue, whether it be like abroad, war abroad, and human rights violations abroad, or whether it be um, immigrant rights at home here in America, like whether it be this very complex issue of criminality versus immigrant status, and then um, one country versus another country, or a government versus its own people abroad, like those are so complex. So, my advice would be first of all, research, make sure you're not just an advocate, but you're an informed advocate so that you know the first thing and last thing about what you want to advocate for so you can answer 95% of questions you'll get asked. Because in a complex issue, many people are going to disagree with you and test you. And so I would definitely say, like, just make sure you're knowledgeable before you really go ham. But even if you want to advocate and you don't have enough knowledge on it, join a grassroots group in your area. Grassroots meaning a group that isn't the Brady United gun violence prevention organization, or Students Demand Action is not grassroots, or Moms Demand Action is not grassroots. Everytown is the organization. And then there's also Team Enough, not grassroots. I mean, Team Enough is great. It was started by my friend Robert, who's a Parkland survivor. His sister Carmen died in Parkland. And so the organization itself is great. But where you're going to learn the most about being an advocate um, and learn the most about the issue before you do advocate is in these grassroots groups. Like on the East Coast, I would say my top three like organizations you could join if you want to advocate. Newtown Action Alliance, which was started after Sandy Hook. Um, I'm gonna go with so that's like Connecticut. Um, Connecticut and up. Like, I don't know. I don't have great East Coast
Like the
geography knowledge.
northwestern or the
Yeah,
northeastern
northeastern
states.
states, you want Newtown Action Alliance, and then like if you're in the Maryland, D.C. area, you want um, either to join the like Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins Coalition, or you want to join Giffords, which granted is not a grassroots organization, but like when I say don't join Brady, don't join Everytown, these big groups, I'm saying that because at the end of the day, they are corporations who are greedy. They are not like they're advocating, yes, but they are not necessarily in it for the right reasons. But I've seen the complete opposite at Giffords. Um, and so I'd say like join Giffords if you're in the DMV. And then if you're below that, Change the Ref was started by survivors of Parkland parents or Parkland, no, Parkland survivors who were parents to Joaquin Oliver, who died. It's called Change the Ref, and that is like a radicalized grassroots gun violence prevention work. So amazing work. And then like if you're in the Central America, anything that isn't on the coast, every state has at least one grassroots gun violence prevention org, and chances are they meet online, not in person, and you'll be able to make it. So I would just like do your research about what specifically small organizations are in your area advocating. Join them, reach out to them, um, and see what you can do. Uh, my last piece of advice would just be like, make sure you remind yourself why. For example, if you are a like first generation American, like your parents are not originally from the United States, but you were born here, and um, you want to make sure that your parents are safe, you're safe, your friends who are in this mixed status are also safe. Um, so you join this national coalition of immigrant rights people. Chances are you're not going to do much advocating, you're just going to be listening. And that's a great thing to learn is how to listen to people who are being affected and listening to how we can help them as individuals. But grassroots organizations are the ones that are on the ground. They're doing the most work to prevent gun violence. And so, yeah, my last piece of advice was just like don't be afraid to be in a smaller organization on controversial issues because chances are that's where you'll be doing the most work. Um, since, you know, bigger organizations tend to be more moderate and grassroots tend to be more radicalized, I'd say like join a group, join a group that's more radicalized.
Yes. Thank you so much for those words of advice, especially
Yeah.
like the examples and the organizations you provided on the East Coast. That's definitely helpful. I was taking mental note. And I will be sure to push those out to people um, as well.
Yeah.
But Brady, I just wanted to say thank you so much again for taking the time to speak with me today. Um, you know, I just can't say enough. I feel like your dedication and your passion for not just public health, but also violence prevention is both inspiring and also deeply needed.
Yeah.
And so I will personally, now that we've met, I will be following your work closely, and I just can't wait to see the continued impact that you make because this issue does not seem to be going anywhere, unfortunately, anytime soon. And we're going to need more people like you to really be leaders in this area and encourage other people to step into their power as well.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you for interviewing me. You had amazing questions and awesome like connecting points. I feel like on the DL, like some interviewers, I was on this like panel the other week, and some interviewers, they send the question, they ask it, they don't ask follow-ups, they don't interact with your answer, and you're just like, why am I here? So like to have someone who is like listening and cares is so I'm so grateful for that. I just want to say one last thing. If you are like a college student it is your right, or even if you're just a student in education, it is your right to be safe where you study. And I believe that being free from gun violence in our communities is a basic need of students. Your life is a basic need. Being free from violence is a basic need. And so, if you're like just hearing about it for the first time, don't be afraid to get interested in gun violence prevention because at the end of the day, it will save lives. Yeah.
Awesome.